Oh, yeah.
All right, here we go. First and foremost, everyone, thank you for being here today as we pay homage and tribute to those who participated in the invasion of Iraq and the subsequent follow-up missions that led to possibly pulling out in 2012. We're still somewhat there, but nonetheless, we all took part, and I like to take comfort in knowing that the contributions of those men who went forward before me allowed us to be successful and carry on those traditions as we moved into a new operation and current operations we see today. Before we begin, I want to read you a scripture that I often think about just about every day, because I'm always in contact with guys from all across the Marine Corps, all across the unit, and it makes me feel comfortable knowing this. But it's from Isaiah chapter 6, verse 8. And it says, "And then I heard the voice of the Lord saying, whom shall I send? And who will go for us? And I said, here am I, send me." Mark wanted me to read a few words, and I'm going to share these words with you before I pass it on to him and his opening remarks. It says, I now know why men who have been to war yearn to reunite. Not to tell stories or look at old pictures, not to laugh or weep. Comrades gather because they long to be with the men who once acted at their best, men who suffered and sacrificed together, who were stripped of their humanity. I did not pick these men. They were delivered by fate and the military. But I know them in a way I know no other men. I have never given anyone such trust. They were willing to guard something more precious than life. They would have carried my reputation, the memory of me. It was part of the bargain we all made, the reason we were so willing to die for one another. As long as I have memory, I will think of them all, every day. I am sure that when I leave this world, my last thought will be of my family and of my comrades, such good men. And I'm going to be passing it on to Mark Mosher, retired Master Sergeant, served 30 years in the Marine Corps, and is continuing to serve in different capacities today.
Gentlemen, good morning. Steve, I'm not sure whether you got this document or not, but I'm going to go ahead and read through about 4 pages. I may paraphrase some stuff, but I want to give a view of why did we go into Iraq? And there's so many reasons why. I'm going to start in the year 1968. Since then, there's been numerous acts of international terrorism caused by Middle Eastern terrorists and their investors. In that era, most of this violence was done by Palestinian terrorists against Israeli Jews. Skyjackings, assassinations, bombings, and arson were the methods they used. Yet, you have to wonder, where did they gain their financial, material, and advanced technical and tactical capabilities? This era had numerous failed post-colonial attempts at state formation throughout the Middle East, and the creation of Israel spawned a series of Marxist and anti-Western transformations and movements throughout the Arab and Islamic world. We all know that. We've experienced it, okay, during the last 20 years. But I'm going back to 1968, okay? The growth of these nationalist and revolutionary movements, along with their view that terrorism could be effective in reaching political goals, generated the first phase of modern international terrorism. The world watched in horror on primetime television as the 1972 Olympics in Munich, West Germany, was the stage for the dormitory housing Israeli athletes was attacked by Palestinian terrorists. 2 Israeli athletes were killed during the initial assault, and 9 others were taken hostage by 8 Palestinian guerrillas known as Black September Organization. In the end, all the remaining Israeli athletes and 5 terrorists were killed when a firefight ensued with West German army, and one of the terrorists tossed a grenade into the helicopter. 3 were captured, but ultimately released in October 1972 after a group of Palestinian quote-unquote students invaded a West German diplomatic facility, demanding the release of the surviving Black September Organization Munich assault team. During 1968, the Ba'ath Party took control of Iraq. One of the Ba'ath Party's up-and-coming talents was Saddam Hussein. By then, he was already involved in coup attempts in the early 1960s and had spent time in prison. At this time, he emerged as a director in a predecessor agency of the hated secret police, and then built what became known as the Mukhabarat, and then also the Fedayeen Saddam later in the 1990s. Through these organizations, Saddam was able to begin his reign of terror, eventually leading to a complete takeover and control of Iraq, and in his mind, the rest of the Middle East. Saddam began to assert open control of the government in 1979 and became president upon Ahmad Hassan al-Bakr's resignation. I'm sure that was forced. He then became chairman of the Revolutionary Command Council and prime minister, among other positions. He used an extensive secret police establishment to suppress any internal opposition to his rule, and he made himself the object of an extensive personality cult among the Iraqi public. His goals as president were to supplant Egypt as leader of the Arab world and to achieve hegemony over the Persian Gulf. His next step after coming into power was to cause a war between Iraq and Iran. Saddam launched an invasion of Iran's oil fields in September 1980, but the campaign bogged down in a war of attrition. The cost of the war and the interruption of Iraq's oil exports caused Saddam to scale down his ambitious programs for economic development. The Iran-Iraq war dragged on in a stalemate until 1988, when both countries accepted a ceasefire that ended the fighting. Despite the large foreign debt with which Iraq found itself saddled by war's end, Saddam continued to build up his armed forces. In August 1990, the Iraqi army overran neighboring Kuwait. Saddam apparently intended to use that nation's vast oil revenues to bolster Iraq's economy, but his occupation of Kuwait quickly triggered a worldwide trade embargo against Iraq. He ignored appeals to withdraw his forces from Kuwait, despite the buildup of a large US-led military force in Saudi Arabia and the passage of United Nations resolutions condemning the occupation and authorizing the use of force to end it. The Persian Gulf War, began on January 16th, 1991, and ended 6 weeks later when the Allied military coalition drove Iraq's armies out of Kuwait Iraq's crushing defeat triggered internal rebellions by both Shia and Kurds. But Saddam suppressed their uprisings, causing thousands to flee to refugee camps along the country's northern border. Untold thousands more were murdered, many simply disappearing into the regime's prisons. Two such events that took place: the chemical weapons campaign, Halabja, beginning on March 16th, 1988. This is before the Gulf War, but these people were suppressed for quite some time thereafter, including most likely while we were in Iraq. Chemical weapons campaign, caused by Saddam Hussein, is the first world leader in modern times to have brutally used chemical weapons against his own people. His goals were to systematically terrorize and exterminate the Kurdish population in northern Iraq, to silence his critics, and to test the effectiveness of his chemical and biological weapons. We're in an era like that right now, aren't we? Think about it. Not only that, and this is just my opinion, but we're under nuclear threat as a result of this invasion in Ukraine. Now, Hussein launched chemical attacks against 40 Kurdish villages and thousands of innocent civilians in 1987 and 88, using them as testing grounds. The worst of these attacks devastated the city of Halabja. 5,000 civilians, many of them women, children, and the elderly, died within hours of the attack. 10,000 more were blinded, maimed, disfigured, and otherwise severely and irreversibly debilitated. Thousands died of horrific complications, debilitating diseases, and birth defects in the years thereafter. Next, the Iraqi government assault on the Marsh Arabs. Starting shortly after the end of the Gulf War in 1991, Marsh Arabs have been singled out for even more direct assault. Mass arrests, enforced disappearances, torture, and execution of political opponents have been accompanied by ecologically catastrophic drainage of the marshlands and the large-scale and systematic forcible transfer of part of the local population. Human Rights Watch believes that many of the acts of the Iraqi government's systematic repression of the Marsh Arabs constitutes a crime against humanity. The crimes were committed as part of a widespread and systematic attack against the civilian population of the Marsh Arabs during the decade of the 1990s. The attack involved the multiple commissions of acts in furtherance of state policy. The underlying crimes include murder of thousands of unarmed civilians, forcible population transfer and coercive expulsion, arbitrary and prolonged imprisonment of thousands, torture, enforced disappearance, persecution of Marsh Arabs through the intentional and severe deprivation of their fundamental rights. Here's where Saddam Hussein must have gotten way out of control and was supported to go international. Okay, here's a few examples attributed to Iraq's state-directed, state-supported, and non-state terroristic activities. There's evidence that shows that there may have been interaction during the first World Trade Center attack in 1993. You guys have this document. You can go ahead and take a look at it for yourselves and dig into the details if you really want to know. But can you now see how this is building up? And at some point, we're just not going to tolerate this anymore. Okay. Then the Bush assassination attempt. When you read through that material, you're going to find out that was this intentional by the Kuwaitis, or was this an actual conspiracy that got outed in perfect timing? I can tell you, having been an anti-terrorism instructor at the John F. Kennedy Special Warfare Center in school, along with my good friend here, brother, Philip Scholes, a Green Beret, okay, we had some folks that came out of Saudi Arabia that had been attacked. Two U.S. Army Special Forces Master Sergeants and a pair of other master sergeants from the Army that were part of the Saudi Arabian National Guard MTTs that were deployed during that time. Okay. What you'll see in the descriptors as evidence during this assassination attempt is the same exact profile that these men gave us when they became our students in the late 1990s. Okay. In conclusion, regardless of the current events in Ukraine against a material superior Russia, we as Iraq veterans can see the similarities in approaches and execution. Yes, we overwhelmed the Iraqis in the invasion in so many dynamic ways, but our intent was always for them to be independent and free without the U.S. dictating to them. Iraq, to some, is the cradle of civilization in the biblical sense. Many of us died there or were disabled while fighting elbow to elbow with willing Iraqi soldiers and policemen. This is what I will never forget. Back to you, Jose.
Thank you, Mark. Andrew, it is all yours.
Check. Am I still good on sound? Have you got me on sound? Check, check.
I got you loud and clear.
Okay.
5 by 5.
All right. First off, just to, thank you again for giving me this opportunity. When I was prepping for this, I realized like there's an unholy amount of information. Even just from my perspective, I went back and looked at satellite, like Google Earth maps of the, Route 7 and all the areas I was in. Looked at some battle histories, and so I'm going to try to work to keep this manageable. What I'm going to start with, and again, if I'm going off the beat, Jose, you know what I'm saying? Like just jerk me back in. Direct my narrative wherever you feel like it needs to go. But just a very brief timeline, and it kind of picks up where Mr. Mosher left off. You got on the 5th of February 2003. That's when Colin Powell made his speech or his address to Congress about the weapons of mass destruction. 17 March, it's when President Bush gave his ultimatum to Saddam Hussein to either evacuate, step down in 48 hours or get invaded. The 20th, the night of the 20th, morning of the 21st of March is when the Allied forces went through the breach. 23 March, the Battle of Mazarea. 24 March, the Battle of the Coil, which was the big fight Second LAR was in. 12 April, Task Force Tripoli is formed. 13 April, the capture of Tikrit. And that was kind of the capture of Tikrit was effectively the end of major combat operations for 2nd Light Armored Reconnaissance Battalion. And from then on, it was just displacing south, where we ended up in Adu and Ied. So just a very brief strategic overview. Essentially, you had dividing Iraq in three, 5 corps. The U.S. Army hooked to the left, went up the western side of Iraq. 1 MEF with the RCT-1 and Task Force Tarawa pushed straight up the middle toward Baghdad. And then the British hooked right and isolated Basra, and then eventually took Basra after a very protracted battle. Like my role in all of this, I showed up in 2nd Light Armored Reconnaissance Battalion in September of 2002. I had graduated the basic officers course, the infantry officers course, and then I spent 6 weeks in LAV leaders course in Camp Pendleton, and then was there. So when I checked into the unit, they didn't have any platoons available, so they put me in the 3 shop. And on, at the time I was very disappointed, but it was actually kind of a very interesting window into how a battalion operates and the different relationships and command dynamics between the CO and his subordinate commanders, staff officers, and so forth. When we deployed, they made me in charge of basically the security platoon, which was kind of a manager of the crew members and the vehicles for the battalion main, the C-squareds, the log vehicles. And I bet the key piece is, for me, is that Second Lieutenant Deb's got an LAV 25. Basically, you know what I mean? So, I mean, I was thrilled. I didn't get like a conventional line platoon like I wanted, but I was going to war, you know what I mean, in an LAV 25, like I trained to. So, and again, stop if you got any questions. So, in essence, the CEO was Colonel Eddie Ray, aka Swamp Thing.
Right on.
Colonel Ray was an interesting cat. He had, I believe, had been a junior, either a junior captain or senior first lieutenant in Desert Storm. And the one single armored incursion that the Iraqis tried, where they did attack, then I'll say Captain Ray, he kind of, you know what I mean? He kind of happened to be in the right place at the right time. They attacked right where he was actually in kind of a rear echelon area. And he called in like a crap load of fixed and rotary wing casts. He engaged them with his LAV, and he got a Navy Cross for blunting that assault, basically by managing supporting arms, essentially. So it was an interesting thing. So, because he came from the background of that incident in Desert Storm. Fast forward 2003, now he's leading 2nd Light Armored Reconnaissance Battalion as the commander. I'll be careful what I say, but I don't mean it like critically, but once it goes out, it's hard to control like how people perceive it. But Colonel Ray was just like, he did his thing, and he like really did not care. You know what I mean? I don't really know what to say from that, but basically, he was definitely in case of war break class CO, as you'll see as I kind of get into my narrative. He also brought NBC. He had a contingent of NBC reporters along that I think Mattis eventually made him kick them out and send them home. There were some incidents involved with them. I'll just say this just because it might be, I think it's interesting. I'm not going to say who the correspondent is because I'm 99% sure I know who it is, but I don't want to say anything critical about somebody unless I'm 100% sure. But anyway, he was a name guy you would recognize. He was the kind of the NBC reporter covering 2nd LAR. Total prima donna. I personally witnessed him just be like just unnecessarily short and rude to just junior Marines walking by saying, "Hey, what's going on?" His producers, line guys, cameramen, they were all really cool. They'd been all over the world. A lot of them had just covered the fighting in Bosnia a couple of years previous. And so they were actually a pretty interesting set. Gunnery Sergeant Strack, now he was with Charlie Company. They had a casualty, and he found one of the news guys on his sat phone, like basically, passing like personal information, and he assaulted the guy, grabbed his phone, smashed it on the vehicle, kind of like tore the guy's shirt, roughed him up a little bit. Anyway, and so Strack got like pulled in and basically got told, "Hey, just stay away from the guy." They told the guy, "Hey, he never knew what hit him. We're going to send him home in irons, whatever, just to placate this, jack off reporter." So anyway, so I say all that. So you had Colonel Ray, you got NBC. As far as like enemy forces and their displacement, I would say, to my knowledge, all we fought was the Saddam Fedayeen, which are just basically pro-Saddam militias from various, they're sourced. Some of them are ex-cons. We were told that the prisons were emptied out, like they just let the crooks out and give them AKs, and send them south to go get killed by the American forces. There were other regime elements, but honestly, and I'll get into details with the Battle of the Coil, I never saw a guy wear a uniform. Everybody I saw was in civilian clothes. A lot of them, they had like snapped off the wood buttstocks of their AKs, so they could carry them under their coats. There's these jerry-rigged like carry straps, things like that. So enemy forces were just these very, very, very poorly trained, very incapable militias. You don't see the much more lethal and effective forces that you see later in the Iraq War, 04, 05, 06, where foreign fighters start coming in, former regime elements, kind of they recover from the invasion, get organized, and then they start their own insurgent activity and so forth. I'm just going to go down my list, and why I decided to do it was there's a couple of issues I wanted to hit, and instead of like backloading them and like just kind of droning on through all of them, I'm going to try to intersperse them in through my narrative. So second LAR is part of RC. It's attached to RCT-1. Charlie Company is detached and sent to Task Force Tarawa under General Natonsky. But other than that, we've got the battalion, all of its log trains, etc. It goes through the breach with a platoon of tanks in the lead. Alpha Company, Apache, led by Captain Monclova. Bravo Company, Black Knights, led by Captain Spiegel. Then you got the battalion forward, and then you got the battalion main. And then generally, I would say about 24 hours behind, you had the logistics trains, headquarters and service company. Just a quick word on force protection. There were no, this was like, and I'm not kidding, it seems amazing today with all of the great stuff we've got. But guys were rolling up in Humvees with like freaking the old 1982 rubber doors. There was no armor. There was no hillbilly armor. Because by 2004, you got guys already like rigging their own kits, before the Defense Department caught up. But in 03, the medical officer, the chaps, all of these, support guys, I mean, it's just like the Humvees you see rolling around in range control. As far as equipment, we only had enough sappies for us to each get one. Sappy went up front, no sappy in the back. Prior to the issue of the interceptor vest and the sappies, both tanks and LAR were issued second chance vests, basically level 2A bulletproof vests that were just like what a cop would wear, only they were olive drab. So you had a kind of a mix of those. I had a guy who actually had his interceptor and sappy stolen from him. Like he took it off, like turned around, it was gone, So I ended up giving him my second chance vest, which he promptly anyway, long story, but but yeah, basically we're in Kuwait. General Mattis gets up, he gets on a freaking, this is George Patton stuff. He gets up on an Amtrak, makes an awesome hoorah speech and says hey, don't worry, you got artillery and air. He's throwing all these Marines a bunch of red meat, and on cue, like this Harrier and this Cobra, start flying and doing freaking, circles, and super motivating. And then Mattis actually had a meeting of all of the lieutenants. He brought in all these 15, 20 lieutenants from the RCT, and he basically said that he said don't worry about being scared. He was like, you're going to be too busy to be scared. He was like, but never forget, you're you see a whole lot your Marines don't see. Your Marines are going to be a lot more, you know what I mean? Their minds aren't whited out with all of these things going on. So you can never forget that. He said, I remember the speech very well. He said that people deal with their fear of death by some just assume that they're going to die no matter what, so they're going to do their job. And other people say, I'm going to survive no matter what, and they just do their job. But either way, they come to terms with it. And then he closed by saying, he said, Stonewall Jackson believed that, you know, he was a very devoutly religious man. And he just believed that his life was in God's hands. That was it. And he no longer was concerned about it and focused completely on his duties and responsibilities without any fear for his personal safety. So General Mattis basically, so he gave us, and he essentially, that's what he said. He talked to us for about 10 minutes, but I was talking the last time we talked about lieutenants get a lot of hate, you know, but General Mattis gave the lieutenants 15 minutes of his time, you know, gave us an attaboy, you know, a good pep talk speech. Again, the other thing I'm going to say too is there was a gigantic concern about chemical weapons, going back to what Mr. Mosher said. The concern, do a little geography lesson here. South of Nazaria is where you get into the salt marshes that he was referring to. And it's impassable. There's actually, you have the highways, and then there's a very, very thin neck of terrain that's actually passable by vehicles, you know, at least, you know, like the number of vehicles that were coming in. And the concern was that right there is where Saddam was going to deploy his chemical weapons, you know. The idea of the thing, he was going to like pour VX on the road, so when people drove through, the dust would kick up, you know, people would ingest it and so forth. So we went in, we rolled in we were issued mop suits, kind of sort of a funny story, but like, so I get my mop suit, this is in Kuwait, and I'm like, well, you know, what happens if I get like hit or my mop suit gets damaged? Like, I'm just going to be in my skivvies. So I went ahead and I had my utilities on, and I pulled my mop suit on over the utilities. And I'm not kidding. By the time I walked from the facility, the little issue spot, back to my vehicle, which was like 200 feet, I was like, F this. No, it ain't happening. You know what I mean? It's like 130 degrees. So the camis, you know, they went in the pack, and we basically just wore mop suits. There were countless, and I mean countless, false alarms with gas that everybody took completely seriously. I was riding in the bed of a truck with my platoon south to the port of Kuwait to pick up our vehicles, and there was some kind of gas alarm on that, and we all masked up. But we had one Marine that he was just having trouble, like just, you know, like deploying his mask. And I mean, I was just watching this guy, like, I mean, literally like melt down, like he was going to die, you know. Anyway, so it was taken very, very seriously. I'm not sure at what point. I'm going to say I think it was north of Nazaria, but not quite in Baghdad, where the call came down that we could go back to wearing utility uniforms and hold the mops to the side. But as I'm sure you've seen, you see the photographs of the invasion, got all these Marines, you know, mopped up, and it sucks, let me tell you. So you got the chemical weapons threat, the mop suits and gas masks. I've got the speech by General Mattis. We punched across the border. There was a vast amount of UXO, mainly from the Gulf War, because we're just punching through open desert, with the plan being that we're going to go up to An Nazaria and then push up to Al Qut, which up Route 7. And basically, you know, the instructions were, you see UXO, what do? You report it. My direct boss was the battalion S3, Major Roth. And so I would call his vehicle. And after literally like the 5th UXO call, you know, because I was kind of like leading the pack for part of this. By the pack, I just mean the battalion main. But the part that I was leading, he finally got on the radio and said, hey, just quit calling it in. Because literally there was like so much UXO and we were going so fast, you know what I mean, that it quickly became obviously impossible to treat the UXO like right now operationally. If we found like a freaking, you know, 2,000-pound bomb sitting in the desert, we'd freak out, you know, cordon it off, call in EOD, all of that stuff. But in an invasion, that all went by the wayside, and it was basically like, just, you know, don't drive over it, you know. So
Awesome.
yeah, so we basically, so we hauled, we got to An Nazaria. Second LAR was not directly involved in the battle. Charlie Company was, because RPG Alley and all of those things was all Task Force Tower. You had a very, very tragic friendly fire incident where where basically tracks pushed. Like if you look at a map of Al-Naziriyah, there's two bridges. There's a highway that cuts north, and there's a highway that hits a T intersection. And the tracks had pushed, I think, beyond the forward line of troops where they wanted it, and they actually turned around and headed south. And that's what created, the A-10s. They see armored vehicles headed south, and they light them up with, I believe, 10 KIA. So that was a disaster. Yep. So when LAR pushes through, we could see the track. Like I saw the tracks, like people's like deuce gear laying on the highway, strings of Mark 19 ammo, like just, you know what I mean? Just, I mean, they had already evacuated everybody, but I saw the aftermath when we punched up. So north of Al-Naziriyah was the biggest fight that 2nd LAR got into. We pulled into a coil. The entire battalion minus supply trains, again, they're about 24 hours south. Around about like right as the sun was going down, it was like really the only real bad guy that I got a good look at. I was looking through my binoculars and like way off on the horizon, I saw like, a Fedayeen guy, and he had his AK, under the crook of his arm. So I called it in. I'm sure if I saw it, everybody else saw it, but, and then that night, we got a Green Star cluster pop up, and the call went out like, "Hey, is that us?" And the answer is no. So it was somebody else's signal pyro, and then the attack started. My role in the battle was very minimal because I was kind of centrally located, offset with the main. The only thing I did, aside from just watch this thing on the roof of my LAV, was we got a call out that there was a casualty. So I got my corpsman, ran all the F over the place in the dark, trying to talking to people, trying to find the guy, and it turned out it was just like a false alarm. There were no casualties at all, not that night during the battle. So we brought in sections of Cobras. We marked our positions with IR strobes for just like 15 seconds. The Cobras literally blew the crap out of stuff. I could go on. It's a long story. I'll just cite, I don't want to go on and on about the Battle of the Coil, but I will cite one very interesting example that I kind of nodded to the last time we talked, was the attack wasn't constant. It would come and go. It would attack at one clock position, and then a few hours later they'd attack from another clock position. They pushed vehicles down the highway toward us. They all got smoked by tows from the AT variants and the tanks. The story I told you about my buddy with the tank, just endlessly machine gunning Fedayeen. This is the incident where that occurred. So at one point it got really, really quiet. No gunfire for a good solid hour. And then one section of the coil just friggin' lit up. One platoon of 4 vehicles, and they just started freaking stitching the ground up, literally right in front of their vehicles with the coax and the roof, the machine guns on the roof. So I figured I knew what happened, but the next day I walked over there and I talked to them, and essentially the Fedayeen had no concept of night vision, no concept of thermals, no concept of any of that. And so they watched these guys basically low crawl, from where they first made visual contact, and they cut the engines off and just sat there, and they let those guys get to be about maybe 50 feet away, and then they just friggin' go, and they obliterated that team of Fedayeen. Okay, so the other thing I'll throw out there, this isn't for history, the history side of this is we had a light armored vehicle air defense variant. It's got a 25 millimeter Gatling gun and 2 4-round Stinger pods. We did not have Stingers, but you'll notice in every war, the German 88 flak guns, the Dusters, the Quad 50s in Vietnam, the ZSU 23-4s, in Afghanistan, the Soviet war in Afghanistan. Air defense variants work great on ground targets, and we found that too, and it's essentially like having that A-10 gun go off 100 feet away. like, I still get goosebumps. Like when that thing goes off, you freaking drop, and grab the freaking deck. But that variant was employed to a great effect. So next day, the sun comes up. Cobras were called in and basically knocked out this small village on the side. I mean, I did not see any civilians. I'm sure it was evacuated at that point. But hey, see you, Steve. I'm glad you could come by, dude. And that's I mentioned it, that was where the war really got real, because I got off my vehicle. I'd seen a lot of shooting, but when I was walking up, that's when I looked down by my boot and I saw an human ear by my boot. And that's, you know what I mean? And that's when I was like, holy crap. And then there were more, like, as I proceeded, I found more and more bodies, of the Fedayeen. And then I'll wrap up the quail part. The last story is just one of those crazy stories, like, you couldn't make it up. But so the three is just like, we've got two groups of enemy prisoners of war. We want you to, dads, consolidate them, and get them ready, because the supply trains are going to punch up. We're going to push them to the rear. I'm like, yes, sir. So I get a couple of my, H&S guys, and I go to the first group. They're getting interrogated, field interrogated by the human exploitation team. One of them actually had like cologne that registered as a blister agent. When we almost, like, everybody was going to mask up, but then somebody, I don't know, some saner head was like, no, it's cologne. We're not doing that. It was just one of those crazy things, right? So we got 10 or 15 enemy prisoners of war.
That's wild.
Yeah, so I'm like, well, we got another group all the way at the north end of the coil. So I punch up there, right? I'm going to come across as kind of a psycho here, but so I get up, and there was another group of about 15. There was a woman who'd been shot in the hip. She was laying on the ground. She pulled the poncho liner over her head. There was a dude with a sucking chest wound that he had his chest sealed, and literally he was like chilling. He was just standing around like nothing was going on. Everybody else, and there were like 10 or 11 people all laying on the ground. They'd all been triaged. They had all had their feet amputated. Like literally everybody was missing their feet, one or both. And so I was like, well, obviously we can't do anything with these guys, like, so we're gonna have to go get those guys, move them up and consolidate them here, because these guys are freaking, non-ambulatory. And I talked to one of my buds about that. My theory what happened was that they were in one of those buses, and maybe one of those Sabo rounds came through and just friggin' took everybody's feet off. But at any rate, they were in stable condition, but non-ambulatory. So I go back. That's one thing about the Iraqis. They were terrified of pistols. We were not issued rifles. Staff NCOs and officers were just issued the M9, and that's it. I ended up using my gunner's M16 a couple of times, but that, again, it was not my TE weapon. So I head back, and literally I walk up. I don't know how funny you'll think this is, but I walk up, and you got the EPW standing in a line. I walk up and I pull my pistol out, and I go, you, and you, right? I'm doing like, I'm picking out stretcher bearers, right? And they freaking freak. They followed it, and they're like, no, please, mister, no, it's okay, Joe, like that. And I was like, and I was like, freaking chill. Like, I just need, and I brought them a stretcher. Like, look, see, just a stretcher. Like, but they really thought they were going to get freaking whacked, because that's their experience going back to Iraq. When Saddam walks up to you and he whips out his freaking 9mm, that somebody's about to get shot, and that's what they expected. So moving right along, one other cool story. So we pushed north to Route 7 toward Al Qut. At one point, we passed a bunch of Land Rovers sitting by the side that had their laundry hanging out to dry, on 550 cord. And the S2, this is really cool. Patrick Campbell, he's the intel officer. He runs over there, talks to them, and we punch up. A few days later, I had the opportunity to talk to him. I was like, who was that? I think they were Brits. I figured they were Brits, He's like, yeah, man, that was the SAS. He says, that morning, he was like, they hopped in those Land Rovers and hauled up Route 7. as fast as they could go. He was like, and every time somebody like shot at him, they like they pluggered in that grid where they took fire from. And they stopped south of Al Qut and hauled all the way back, you know. And then he said they gave me like a copy, a list of the grid coordinates of all of the contacts. And he's like, he said, Dad, you're not going to believe this, but the guy that I was talking to had bullet holes in his clothes. Like his utility uniform had like freaking like holes in it, you know, from where they did their thing. So I knew the SAS was cool, but that was pretty interesting. So kind of trying to run along here and not take up too much time. So RCT1 is pushing up Route 7 to Al Qut, being the next big city. There's a series of little towns up Route 7, and in each of these towns, there's kind of a contact. The main is sort of the last element through, and I was the tail end Charlie, with the CO was out running around doing CO things. The XO was in his 25 up front at this point, and I was in the back. And so it's kind of like, in a way, like they get their butts kicked by everybody, you know, and then I'm the very last guy, you know, so we ended up getting shot at, you know, a decent amount because, you know, as we're going up the highway, right, that's where the survivors like pop out and start popping off rounds. So, and what I noticed was that they were just like basically bounding back. None of the contacts were that bad until we get to Kalat Sakar. If you look on the map, Kalat Sakar is like kind of the last. There's a long stretch of highway between Kalat Sakar and Al Qut, and that's kind of where they decided to make their stand. Because I've got two radios, one's on movement TAC, one's on battalion TAC. That was, you know, since I was, you know, in the part of the battalion main, so I was actually getting to listen to the company commanders and, you know, the head shed talk. You know, way above my pay grade at that time. But basically, like, everything was like cool, calm, collected, rolling through, calling in Cobras, all of that stuff. And then it's kind of like at Kalat Sakar, I'm not saying nobody like panicked, but everybody was like, we have got to get out of here. Like, you know what I mean? Kalat Sakar was not like a beatdown. Kalat Sakar was like, we got to get the whole battalion through here as fast as possible, because they didn't, you know what I mean? That like they didn't just like fade into the dust. That's that Kalat Sakar, like that's, you know, that is where like I was in that was my most intense war experience. Was just that maybe 15, 20 minutes. That's where I had tracers coming in, rounds dinging off the vehicle, muzzle flashes. Our 25 millimeter cannon was actually inoperable at that point. So I was using my gunner's M16 and he was using the 240. And, you know, and it was just like muzzle flash, just put that front sight post, freaking squeeze that round off, muzzle flash stops, move on to the next one, you know, and until we finally, you know, got out of there. So turns out that Al Qut was a feint. We basically bypassed Al Qut, punch up through Baghdad. One quick thing I want to say, and I don't mean any disrespect to the officer, but I referred to it the last time we talked. We're rolling, and then all of a sudden everything comes to a halt, and we're like in this like sheep country. I would say it felt like forever, but it was probably just two days. You know, we were down to one MRE a day was all that was allowed because of the logistical strain. You know, and so anyway, but what had happened was I didn't find out till we got back. That was when General Mattis relieved the RCT CO, basically for not moving fast enough. So the RCT CO was relieved of command and sent home, you know, and replaced. But again, it's one of those things where you have big movements going on at the upper echelons, and you at the lower echelons don't really know, you know what I mean? All you do is just react to the circumstances. So we roll back. April 12th is they formed Task Force Tripoli, which is 1st, 2nd, 3rd LAR, a HIMARS battery, a golf company, I think of 23rd, like a reservist infantry company, And then basically we punch all the way up to crit, take to crit with very, very minimal resistance. We do a rip with fourth ID, and then we head south. Let's see. Yeah, to Adumanaya. And Adumanaya was an abandoned military base, and basically we sat there for a month, kind of depressurized, just chilled out until it was time to go home. So that's kind of the short and sweet. I'll hit one or two things, and then I'm good, and I'll just unless you have any questions. IEDs. IEDs were just becoming a thing right as we were crossing the border to Kuwait. The second LAR didn't encounter any that I'm aware of. That became an enemy TTP, obviously like a huge one, probably the biggest threat. But during the invasion of Iraq, at least with RCT-1, we didn't encounter it. We encountered RPGs, small arms. There was a T-55 tank that was running around for a few minutes before it got smoked. But basically that. So IEDs were not something they were employing yet. The other big thing I'll say too is collateral damage and the deaths of civilians. All of there were no escalation of force procedures, none. And you understand now there's a 33-step process of signaling, firing a pin flare. Vehicles have signs. They've got Arabic. There was none of that. And so this is not intended to be inflammatory or racial or anything like that, but you definitely had a clash of cultures between the Arab mindset and the Western mindset, because you gentlemen or any of us, if there was war going on out in the street, we'd be hunkering down. And what I saw was the Iraqis just went about their business, driving to work, stuff like that. And so, so when these cars, and they don't stop, you see 40 LAVs parked along the highway, you probably turn around and go back, but a lot of Iraqis did. And when they hauled at these LAVs at 50 miles an hour, they got lit up, And then when you go over and you check, it's like a freaking dead taxi driver, or that type of situation. It's very tragic. And that's the reason that escalation of force procedures were put in, to try to bridge that cultural gap and reduce the level of collateral damage that we were encountering. I already covered MAP. I covered LAV AD. The equipment. One thing I'll say, and I've been out of the game for a long time, so I don't want to say a whole lot, but I joked last time that we call it the world's longest drive-by shooting, a 600-mile drive-by shooting. Yeah. I wasn't in Alpha Company or Bravo Company, so I can't say, but the purpose of light armored reconnaissance is just that, reconnaissance, screenlining, scouting, you know what I mean? Freaking watching the flanks, all of that stuff. I don't believe a lot of that happened. I think the LAV was used because of its speed and its firepower, with the tanks up front for the tanks to really, they can take the brunt of it. But I don't believe, and I'm open to correction if anybody hears this and is like, what the hell is he talking about? I don't believe that LAVs were really used doctrinally. They were used because of their assets. Oh, one thing I will say that is really cool. We had a electronic warfare vehicle with a Arabic speaker, and because the Iraqis were broadcasting in the clear, no crypto. And so they actually called the LAVs destroyers. And so that became, after we got back, the destroyer became the call sign for a second line armored reconnaissance battalion. So it's kind of a double dog thing there. The enemy gives you a name, Second LR was the Wolf Pack. There was this pissing contest because I'm going to say first or third had that. So we became the Barbarians for this deployment. Everybody thought Barbarian was gay. We thought the new freaking, the new unit patch with a little Viking helmet, the people call it well, I won't go there, but anyway, the point is that it was very, I don't know who's going to hear this, and I'm going to try and keep it PG, but it was very unpopular. The call sign was unpopular, the patch was unpopular, and so forth. So, but right when we got back, boom, we're destroyers now. The patch gets this like total revamp. So that was pretty cool. That's pretty much it. My wife read Generation Kill, and I have not read it. I've read parts of it, but she was coming over to me because all like Second ILR keeps popping up in the book. All they do is show up and like kill a bunch of civilians, And anyway, she's like, "Did this happen? Did that happen? Did this really happen? Did you guys do this?" I was like, "Yeah, I mean." But it wasn't like Me Lie or anything. Nobody just like up and just wasted somebody just for because they're sadists. It was these are all unfortunate situations where people come at you 40 miles an hour. You don't know who they are. You know what I mean. So anyway, but we did work co-located with First Recon Battalion. They painted their faces to look like skulls and stuff like that. So there you go. I was like within 50 feet of people that had a miniseries made about them. So that was cool. So anyway, I think those are like the big ticket items. And I'm open to any type of questions or anything I might have missed or what have you. But thanks for listening to me run my mouth for 30 minutes.
That was great.
I've got some historical stuff for you. Eddie Ray, going back to the Battle of Kafji.
Yeah.
Back in the first Gulf War, right? So I lost a Marine then. His name was Dion Stevenson. Young guy. He was in forced recon, but he just kept on not doing what he was supposed to do as far as, when we did jumps, he was always trying to do stand-up landings with a round parachute and got tossed out with the 1st Battalion, 9th Marines and ended up in the back of an LAV and got smoked by an A-10. Sergeant Bill Imes, Alpha Company, 3rd Recon, old friend of mine, got the Bronze Star during the Battle of Kafji. Great support from LAR during that time period. And then an old friend, retired as a colonel. His name was Jeff Powers. He was a captain back then as well during that particular battle. You brought up Generation Kill and your SAS story. Yeah, that's high-speed reconnaissance, and who dares wins, and that's the SAS motto. Let's see here. Yeah, 1 MRE a day, sir. Holy crap! I mean, you guys were famished. How about the water? Was there plenty of water during that time period, or were you guys deficient there as well?
We had plenty of water. Just there was that Saudi contract, you know what I mean, stuff. But yeah, we rolled out like just like loaded to the gills, and I never saw it, but we had to have been punching LAV like logistics variants and trucks south. You know what I mean, for resupply, or more likely they pushed it up to us. But no, we were always good on water. Just I would always cheat a little bit at the end of the day, and I would maybe eat like the crackers from the next day's MRE and just kept it rolling, But no, we were good on water. It was just hot.
Absolutely, especially when you got mock gear on. You talked about doctrinal usage of the LAV. We have Sergeant First Class Philip Scholes with us, who could give you a little bit of perspective on what they did in the early 1980s in Cold War Europe. He was a Bradley crewman back in those days. I attended the Ground Reconnaissance Conference in 1992 as the ops chief for the First Force Reconnaissance Company back then. And we talked a lot about not boat spaces, but vehicle spaces during that particular conference, which made everybody in the room very uncomfortable about what they were telling us back then. We were more kind of oriented to ground reconnaissance on foot back in those days. But when we started, and this is post-Gulf War, we started talking about how are we going to put a butt in every seat imaginable in every type of vehicle that we have in our inventory, including non-conventional stuff back then.
Mm-hmm.
And the LAV was a hot topic during that time period. Also that year is when 1st Reconnaissance Battalion changed its flag over to First Reconnaissance Battalion Light Armor during that time period as well. Let's see. You mentioned something about the utilization of, was it a Gatling gun that you mentioned?
That's correct. Yeah, it was I think it's a 5 or 6 barrel, but it used the same 25 millimeter ammunition that the Bushmaster used.
Roger that. So I was telling Philip Schultz this story about this happened in early 1989. Okay, I was in Alpha Company 3rd Recon, and we did a Pathfinder mission in support of 25th ID that was at Schofield Barracks in Hawaii. And I went in, I set up the LZ with my team to bring in 2 105s, their units of fire, the crews, and also a ground attack Gatling gun that we had a good time. Once Norman Schwarzkopf was off post and walked away after we did our demonstration, and the Marines and the soldiers had a great time firing 105s and those Gatling guns just blowing away Dipsy dumpsters downrange. It was awesome.
Yeah.
Cool story, sir. Awesome.
Yeah, one thing I'll tack on about the air defense variant, like I said, that they didn't have stingers, just ammo. And we had, during the whole invasion, we had one false alarm call for Iraqi fixed wing. And it turned out to be, I think, like some F-15s that somebody got confused about. But the whole, battalion herringbone, you know what I mean? Just like we did a freaking, air defense drill. And this is just like this is like a pool table. There's no cover whatsoever, no concealment, I should say, whatsoever. And all we did was just sit there for about 30 minutes. And I wasn't like, and I mean, if I was freaking scared, I mean, I have no problem saying I'm scared. But it was just like everybody was very tense because, there was, if there was actual, like, whatever, like whatever the Iraqis are rocking with, Su-24, MiG-17s, whatever, there's nothing we can do about it. You know what I mean?
Right.
The only thing that we could do is just if we made visual contact is just stomp on the gas and everybody like haul and try and disperse. But then the call came down like, hey, you know what I mean? Move forces, it's a mistake. We all got back on the road and freaking took off. One other thing I'll throw out there, the whole invasion force got log jammed on that first night because there was a sandstorm. And this is really amazing. I just throw it out because I know y'all appreciate it. It was so dark that you couldn't see with night vision goggles on. There wasn't enough ambient light to magnify. So what they did is they cracked an IR chem light and taped it to the battalion C squared, and literally that's all you could see was just this freaking dot. And we did not, but we did have we had a Marine fatality that night because basically everybody is like, it's pitch black. You've got literally like, 100 plus vehicles scooting up, scooting back. And an Amtrak actually ran over a captain from 2nd CEB. You know what I mean? Who had just like, like this group, they had bagged out on the road or in the vicinity of the road. And then when they were jockeying vehicles around, he was unfortunately killed. But I'm serious, is like, it was like, I put my NVGs up to my head, nothing, I'm sure the guys with thermals, I'm sure could see, but it was just really amazing. It only happened once. That was the only night in 5 months that we had those kinds of visual conditions, but it was crazy. And yeah.
I can't remember what the term is for those particular types of sandstorms, but I experienced one in Ramadi in 2005. And, we were holed up with Alpha Company 1-5 at the government center downtown. And one of those storms rolled in. And I tell you what, we couldn't see anything. It lasted for about, I'd say 15 hours. And you want to talk about pucker factor.
Yeah.
What a perfect time to be assaulted by some, direct action type troops. And yeah, that was something. Everything was orange the next day, completely covered with that nasty dirt. And yeah, I'll never forget that myself.
We did have one. I don't want to stray too far from what I know personally firsthand, but I was buds with the platoon commander of the tank platoon. But they had a platoon commander who was killed during one of these sandstorms, exactly like what you're talking about. He was popped up in his turret, and somebody got on the tank and killed him with a pistol, because of the like very, very reduced visibility. One, I don't want to get into like there I was type stories, but it is kind of an interesting, just a vignette, I'll say real quick. So we're all parked on the side of the highway, very, very open terrain. And I'm there, and this guy like walks up to me, like walks up to my vehicle. I'm up in the turret, and he just yells, he's like, "Hey," he's like, "Can you shoot that house over there?" And like way off is, it's like a house. So I'm like, "Yeah, sure, no sweat." So I pulled we had just gotten, and I don't want to like totally nerd out, but this was like a really good piece of gear. LAVs traditionally had those spade grips, the Echo, which with practice, one of the company gunnies was like crazy, insane accurate with that thing. But most of it, it's an area effect weapon. Well, they replaced it with the Platt mount from Australia, and it takes a 240 Golf machine gun, and basically you can unhook it and you can swing that thing, like all around. There's a safety stop, so you can't like depress it enough to hit the vehicle, but you can pull that stop off and like literally like shoot like right next to the vehicle. And the other plus is that like if you have to pull your LAV off the line, like I actually had my scouts like dig a 2-man position, and we put the 240 from my vehicle on there to cover that sector of fire while the vehicle got pulled back for some maintenance. So I see the house, and so I open fire at it with the 240, and you know how like in desert conditions, distances are very deceptive. And I knew it was far away, but man, it was way farther away than I thought. And all my tracer rounds fell short. So I adjusted the ladder sight on there, gave her another burst. It's almost on there. And then like whack-a-mole, Major Rock pops up and is like, "What the F are you shooting at? Stop." So I was like, okay, well, fast forward later that afternoon, we're rolling up. I think this was in the SAR. There's a lot of different things happened. But basically, it was just one of those things where like, I'm scanning the houses, right? And I see like maybe like 200 yards away, there's a building, and I see a silhouette in the window. And I don't see a weapon, but I look and I can see that there's sandbags stacked up in the window. I was like, that's good enough for me. So I like zero in and fire a burst. And I hit the top of the windowsill, and the guy, I know I didn't hit him. He dropped, but he didn't like drop, he hit the deck. And then I looked and I saw the ladder was still, I never zeroed my ladder back out. You know what I mean? I was so pissed off. You know what I mean? Because like that, I missed, you know what I mean? Because I had my dope from back when I was shooting at that house like a kilometer away or something. I was like, "Dadgum, that's that guy's lucky day." Because if I had just remembered to freaking zero it out, I would have got it, But as it is, I smacked the windowsill. So anyway, I don't want to get into the minutia like that, but it's just one of those crazy things. It's like I was telling my wife, like war is very much, it's like these crazy stories you hear about with a tornado where you've got a turkey, like that's feathers stripped off, or a straw stuck into a telephone pole. There's things that happen, that like you just sound unbelievable, until you actually see it for yourself. So
Awesome.
I do have one question.
Right.
What was the strategy behind not holding previous held gained territory? I mean, I know like clear whole build was like a whole big deal, I think, when we were in, but then we had to go back and retake the cities.
Yeah, that's something, and I'm going to stray out of my lane a little bit. But one thing that we found out, because I went back to Iraq in 05, but this was like Western Anbar, also with second LAR, was that, and again, this is, I'm not like, I don't, it's not like a critique, it's just one of those things. General Mattis wanted speed. You know what I mean? It was obvious, even at the lowest levels, that we had them on their back feet. You know what I mean? They were just collapsing. They were literally like almost like just like the Battle of the Coil. They were just getting massacred every time they stood up. And so he wanted to roll. And the downside of rolling is either non-existent or very perfunctory interaction with the locals. We had I don't know what his role was, but he was an Iraqi national that was some kind of contractor, and they were using him to like spot, people. I only know a little bit about it, so I don't want to say a lot. Not because I'm trying to be Secret Squirrel James Bond. I know something, but I just generally don't know. But from talking to that guy's handlers and other things, I think we were used to settle a lot of scores. When you're like rolling through there and somebody just walks up and said, "Hey, he's in the Ba'ath Party," I know that type of person was just friggin' rolled up and stuck on a truck and sent to the rear. And was he really in the Ba'ath Party? Maybe. But you were not in a position to check. I know for a fact, because I did some more prisoner handling in Tikrit. There was an airport and then a literally like a freaking like a rodeo, like a horse stadium, a hippodrome, and they were using that as a prisoner processing place. We had all of these dudes that one guy was like a doctor, but he'd been mad because he had a pistol, but I went through all of his crap and I could tell like this guy he's either a freaking James Bond posing as a doctor or he's a doctor, So when we turned all those guys over, I talked to them and I said, this guy, and this guy, I'm pretty sure are okay. You know what I mean? They were in the wrong place right at the wrong time. But again, that was just one time. And I'm not saying that, yay me, I'm just saying like, you're under no compunction to do that. Like, you have so many other things going on. So I don't think we did, I don't want to say due diligence, but I do think we were probably used to settle like feuds and stuff like that. As far as like to try to directly answer your question, it was just the priority wasn't on interfacing in the security situation. The priority was like friggin' taking the towns, taking Baghdad, taking Tikrit, taking Mosul, grabbing like the dam, up in Mosul, all of that type of stuff. Freaking people, not our job, but like, guys going after high value targets, the deck cards, all that crap. So that would be my answer, was just a matter of priorities. And then of course, as things slowed down and we got into kind of the nation building phase, that's when, and for a fact, I don't know if we want to chase that rabbit, but we rebuilt the Iraqi police force, at least twice, you know what I mean? Maybe 3 times, where, it's kind of like denazification, at the end of World War II. You get rid of all the people from the enemy party because they're the enemy, you can't trust them. But on the flip side of the equation, you're also getting rid of everybody that knows how to do stuff, And then when they tried to rebuild the police, they're like, hey, join the new police. Well, guess who? I mean, it's a grassroots like Al Qaeda in Iraq foreign fighter fest. You know what I mean? And that's why they had to build it and collapse it more than once. Eventually, they got it to a workable solution, but at the time, it was just freaking collapsed. I remember when we were in Andumanaya, I actually I saw a guy with an AK. I freaking whipped around. I was like, "Whoa, it's a cop." He was standing in the middle of an intersection directing traffic with just an AK slung on him, and and it dawned on me. I'm not trying to be melodramatic. Like I almost whacked him, but I did orient on him and saw him as a threat. But then I realized it's like life is starting to come back. There's traffic in the streets. the cops are back on duty. You know what I mean? You know, so you can't just smoke everybody that's got a rifle anymore, you know? So anyway, that's kind of rambling, but that would be my answer. Uh, it's just that holding territory just was not a priority to General Mattis at that time. And then, you know, and then the war moved into the next phase. So
Yeah,
but that-
yes, you know, that comment I made earlier about the Ground Reconnaissance Conference in 1992, that we needed to find a way to put, you know, a warm body in every seat in the United States Marine Corps vehicle fleet. There was also what happened for a few years was speed is our security and don't stop for nothing. That was the attitude back then. And apparently that got deeply held within those officer ranks, those field officers. And of course, the general officers of the time were guys that were coming up, Gulf War, and pretty much put the Marine Corps together as we saw it when you guys conducted the invasion of Iraq. And it shows that we didn't have time to go ahead and stand there and play Ring Around the Rosies. There was a definite enemy that was out there, and it was voluminous, and you guys did a great job, period. So thank you for all that experience. There's so many valuable TTPs that are in there. I wish John Poole could have listened to that story, because one of the things that John has taught me and those that I share his books with, one of the things that John taught me was that you guys, through your experience, have learned more about warfare than Clausewitz or Sun Tzu could ever teach you. Those are just philosophical observations. It's what you guys actually did. And, you know, when we sit down in groups like this and we share what we've experienced, that means more, you know, than sitting down in TBS or, you know, infantry squad leader school or any of that kind of stuff. It's all done in the field. That's where the real learning's at. And I'm just grateful to have been invited into hearing your story. This is awesome. Thank you.
Oh, absolutely. One thing I need to give this gentleman a shout out, and I wish I knew more about it, but his name was Gunnery Sergeant Sherrill. He was the assistant ops chief for 2nd Light Armored Reconnaissance Battalion. Ops chief was Master Sergeant Connor, who was really interesting because he looked, if you ever saw him, like he looks like an accountant. He looks like a paper pushing nerd, but he was like a freaking stone psychopath. Like, I mean, just like, anyway, so Sherrill was his chief, and I don't want to like butcher it, but like Sherrill was a guy, he had to be in his mid 40s, which is ancient, you know, at that, you know, and he basically wheeled and dealed like a spot on the bus, basically to get back into the fight. He'd been with 2nd LAR, and he told me, he said, when he was talking, I mentioned NBC, he's like Eddie Ray then and now, you know, is what he said. But going to what you're saying about the Fedayeen, and Sherrill said something that I didn't forget, because it's very easy to discount the Fedayeen as a bunch of you know, cannon fodder clowns. He said, he's like, these guys are really, really dangerous because they're not trained. He says, when you're going up against somebody that's trained, you can turn the wrap around and kind of figure out what they're going to do. You know, like this makes sense, that makes sense. He says somebody that is untrained and just coming into the fight with like no experience or no formal thought process, there's a lot of weaknesses to that, but there's a lot of strengths to it too. And he was basically like, don't underestimate these guys, because like, you know, they're going to end up doing crap that we would never expect, because they don't know what they're doing, you know.
Yeah, that's a true statement, because if you look back, General Paul Van Riper, after he retired, he was the guy that got hired to be the Op 4 against coalition forces in preparation for Iraq, and he utilized that same mindset. Fetty and Saddam were gangsters. They're a cultural movement. And you heard what I mentioned earlier about the cult of personality. That was one of the things that Saddam adopted early on in his rise. And, you know, he took that generation and he molded them to be psychopaths just like him. And that's what they were. You know, I remember my boss, a guy named Lieutenant Colonel John Foster, he's a career MP. He had daily contact with the governor of Al Anbar province right there in Ramadi. And his bodyguards were all Fetty and Saddam guys that were debaptized, like you said, or de-Saddamized, however you want to term it.
Mhm.
And they all had, you know, the tattoos and all that stuff. And I was like, so these guys should be in Abu Ghraib. And he's like, no, these are his bodyguards. So you're going to train them, Top. You know, we bring them on to Camp Ramadi and we train them on the ranges out there on RPSD type tactics. Yeah, very interesting. And you made that mention of the guy standing there directing traffic. That was part of my job too. There were so many different types of law enforcement there. You had provincial cops, you had traffic cops, you had facility security cops, you had highway patrol cops, all kinds of different types of law enforcement out there. And they all had, you know, their sheikhs who were the police chiefs of those style of law enforcement. And you had to learn the culture, you know, and that's one of the things that we always applied was Maslow's hierarchy of needs and figure out, you know, were you guys are you guys part of the what was the name of that? It's a huge, the Al Dulami tribe. Are you guys part of the Al Dulami tribe? Because, you know, that's not beyond Bath. That goes to Damascus, you know, in its riches and stuff like that. So you got to figure out, okay, now I'm seeing where the money comes from and how the money gets moved around and why they want power, etc. So there's just so many dynamics that during the assault, you don't have time to think about that stuff. But once you get into consolidation, wow, then it turns into a real problem.
Yeah.
That, you know, so wow, this is awesome.
Well, one thing I'll go ahead, man.
It's great.
I'm going to cheat just a little bit. You're talking about tattoos and stuff. When we went back in 2005, a second LAR was operating about 60 miles from the Syrian border. The exact opposite of 2003, like the threat was all IEDs. I don't think we engaged a single enemy, you know, like with.
Were you near Al-Qaim?
No, it was Camp Korean Village.
Oh, Korean Village.
Yeah, which is, you know, right outside, well, not right outside, Rutba.
Rutba, right?
Yeah.
Oh.
And the JVCC, I was in the JVCC when it got shot at. That was my 15 minutes of fame in that deployment. That's kind of a funny story. The short version is they were doing a couple of operations. And it sounds like you might be in the same neck of the woods in Al-Qaim, like they were like called Sword and Spear or something like that. But they were pulling assets to the north.
That was a freaking Star Wars bar up there. Wow.
But they had the Joint Border Control Center, which is like maybe like a quarter of a mile outside of Rutba on the east side of the city. So they wanted to pull those guys out, and they were like, "Hey, I was the H&S executive officer. They're like, we want you to take a couple of freaking cooks and go guard that place, you know." And so I was like, I'm ready for freaking Zulu Dawn. I went down to the ASP. I got fat. I mean, we like loaded up like crates of like 240 ammo, like, you know what I mean? Like grenades. Like, I mean, like, I'm like, we're not going to get like wiped out, you know? Nothing that dramatic happened, but we got there and there were two posts on the roof of this refurbished, like old Adobe police station. And somebody in Rutba decided to get cute, and they fired a heavy machine gun, and a stream of tracers went right. The posts were probably about maybe 50 feet apart. and the tracers went right between the posts on the roof. So I climbed the ladder to get to the post so I can try and see what's going on. And then a round of indirect comes in and hits. And I get up there, and I knew the watch officer. It was the NBC officer, Watts Beach, back in KV. And I was a little bit more of a senior lieutenant, and I kind of knew the game, you know. And I was just like, so I called back and I say, hey, we're taking indirect fire and heavy machine gun fire at the JDCC. Like, I request permission to put some aluminum up with the 81s, you know. And he was like, yeah, go ahead, you know. So I tell the mortar crews, I'm like, freaking unload on them, because in about 3 minutes they're going to call back and tell us to stop, you know. So they just go, you know what I mean? They freaking like you know, 81 that little part of what, and then the radio, you know, Striker 5 was my call sign, you know, because like, you know, Striker 5, you know, this is, you know, whatever, destroyer or whatever. Anyway, the point is, they called just like I thought, stop, ceasefire immediately, you know. And I was like, Roger that. But I was like, we got our little piece, you know what I mean, before they came in and tried to, you know, kill our fun. But one thing I will say about Intel, we did a lot of counter mortar rocket patrols around KV. We would get rocketed pretty much like every Thursday, like clockwork. 107 would come in. It only hit inside the perimeter once. I don't mean any disrespect at all, but, you know, the powers that be were like, hey, go out there, you know, go get them, you know. Yeah. And I would explain, like, we found these, you know, they're a washing machine timer. Like, I mean, I'm more than happy to go out there, but they're gone. They're long gone. They set this thing up at like 5 o'clock this morning. You know what I mean? You know, and you know, it's like corrugated tin on an engineer stake with a freaking sandbag, you know, line it up. But we got an intel dump. This is going back to what you were talking about tattoos, about these dot tattoos, which meant that they were some sort of foreign fighter or what have you. Mm-hmm. And a few miles away from KV was an abandoned like pumping station or some kind of station. So we decided to check it out one day, and it turns out this guy, and I presume his 2 wives, were squatting there, you know. So we put a cordon around the building, and then there's a gunshot, you know. So I'm like, hey, what's going on? They're like, the dog is attacking us, you know. So literally this guy's dog attacks a guy. He shoots the dog runs around, attacks another Marine, the Marine shoots the dog again, the dog like walks 10 feet, falls over dead, you know. So we go in there, and it turns out these people are like squatting in there. So I had 2 03s, the rest were all, you know, com guys and stuff like that. That's another story, I don't want to go into story mode, but that's the closest I came to getting killed. I got almost shot in the head with a 240 by a guy that like slammed the freaking charging handle shut, you know, and put a round right over the top of my noggin. But anyway, so I get the 203s because I figured they're the most competent. You know what I mean? So we go in, and I get the guy, and I don't think this is illegal, but, you know, I pulled my pistol out, and I didn't point it at him. I just held it to the side of his neck, you know. And I was just like, I was trying to sign like, I'm sending him my guys up, you know, up to your house, like, you know, showing him like, I'm gonna shoot you, you know. Like, you know, if anything happens to them, I'm going to shoot you. You know, I was like, you know, Fedidine, I was like, I was trying to like, Mujahideen. He was like, nope. So we get it, and there's, he's got AKs. They're allowed to have 1 AK with 50 rounds of ammunition. Yep. He's got 2. But I'm just like, I call it in. I'm just like, you know what, we'll just keep 1 AK, not make a big deal about this. And as I'm rolling out, I see he's got the tattoo. So I'm like, aha, I got you, you know. So we go ahead and detain him. We strip the AKs up, friggin' jack up the gas pistons. The women are like screaming, the whole night. So we take him and we throw him in the det vac. I go to debrief the S2. I'm like, hey, I got a guy today in that pumping station. I was like, you know, he's got he's like, oh man, is it that tattoo thing? We freaking scrubbed that. That's bogus. You know what I mean? It's just bad intel. I was like, oh, that, okay. So I go to the three, who I will not name. He and I did not have a very good working relationship. This is '05. Major Roth was awesome. This is a different three. And I basically tell him the story. Look, sir, I want permission, basically, because when we let guys out of the debt fact, we would take them down to Route Mobile and say, bye. You know what I mean? Baghdad is that way, Rupa is that way, and you're on your own. But I told him, I was like, we kind of, in all good faith, we kidnapped him, we shot his dog. You know what I mean? Blah, blah, blah. So he was like, yeah, no sweat. So I go down to the dead fact that we go out at night. We would do vehicle mounted patrols in the day, foot mobile at night. And basically, but we do the vehicles, we load them up, and it's really kind of sad, but it's kind of cool. So we drive up to his little thing, I punch security out, and I walk him to the gate. He's blindfolded, flex cuff. And I get to the gate, and I cut his flex cuff off, and I can't open the gate. I'm trying to freaking open the gate to the pumping station. And then he just like reaches over, gives it like a jiggle, shakes it three. He does the thing, right? And opens when he hears the noise of the gate, And so I just like basically kind of like pushed him in there, and he stopped and he turned around and he hugged me, and went in there. We watched, and he went around calling the names of those chicks. I guess they were gone. And then he started freaking effing around with the vehicle, like trying to get it to start. And I was like, we're done here. We've done all we could do.
Yeah.
So anyway, it's one of those things. It's not intended to be a sob story. If anything, we kind of screwed the dude, and then we tried to make it right. But again, it goes back to, like, all you got is your actionable intel. And in that particular situation, they got intel, which I'm 100% confident that they were positive that it was correct, when they passed it. And then it turns out that the situation changes, and the intelligence is no longer valid, So anyway, just a little, again, that's a cheat, because that's not the invasion of Iraq. That is 2005. Anyway, just a little, that's, when intel goes wrong, is the name of that story. So.
That's good to go, man.
Yeah, I'll never forget it, because it didn't dawn on me till later. I was like, dumbass, you should have taken his effing blindfold off. Like, he thought he was going to get shot. Yeah, like, you know what I mean? But honestly, I did not think about it at all until long after,
I can tell you a very similar story. Handled police operations at the provincial level and in Ramadi. So anyways, the the provincial chief, his name is Shocker, right? And I guess he'd been a pilot, a helicopter pilot for Saddam back in the day. So he was, close, but yet we still said, well, out of the bad guys that are here, he's probably the goodest bad guy. So let's just use him for the time being.
Yep.
So he became the provincial police chief. Well, of course, his family members, his brother, decided he was going to go ahead and do a weapons delivery somewhere on the eastern side of Ramadi one day, and got pulled over on Route Michigan with a trunk load of guns. So we put him in the diff on Camp Ramadi, did his 14 days. And of course there was the back office negotiating on get him out. He was only going to go ahead and, provide these weapons for the good guys over there that, want to take care of their neighborhood and this and that. So at about, I don't know, it was about sunset that afternoon. It was a Sunday, I remember. I and one of my staff sergeants had to go down to the diff, pick this guy up, jump in the back of a Bradley with this guy still, with cuffs on and a hood on his head, put him in the back of a Bradley, and a platoon of Bradleys went out in the middle. I don't even know where we went to go drop this guy off. And when we got there, there must have been 20 other dudes at this compound having a barbecue, waiting for him to show up. And we walked in there and had chow with these guys, and then jumped back to Bradley's and drove back to Camp Ramadi. But those are, nobody knows about these types of things that take place. That's something I did not see was going to be put into, my quiver of arrows of things that I've done. But those are things that happen, and you just got to roll with it. I mean, we dealt with a coup at one of our police stations, a traffic police headquarters. They had a coup, and I was in a room full of guys, and I'm with a young Marine captain who was an assessments officer from 2MEF at Fallujah. And he was scared shitless because the assessment that I had put out after a vulnerability assessment of our operations, he couldn't believe it. But now he was getting to see it for himself. And he's like, "Todd, we're surrounded in this room." I said, "Yeah, this is great. And I got grenades in my freaking, my pouch here. So I'm not worried, sir. They're the enemy. We're only here to go ahead and negotiate and put who's who in the zoo and organize them and send them on the right direction. And after that, let's get the hell out of the way. This is their country, man."
That's something that we discussed in the 03XX podcast I was on, which I just very briefly rehash it, is Fox 28 was going to go to Haditha, and we got intel briefed about, et cetera. They were gonna spread the companies of 2nd Battalion 8th Marines along the Word, right? And Fox got Haditha, and what we were told, was that they had just fired the police chief, because the police chief, they were, there was an incident where they beheaded the people in the soccer stadium. And so with the 2006 uprising, where I believe it was 06, the Iraqi forces took control of Haditha. Well, then now the police chief, they're starting to execute basically like collaborators or foreign fighters that happen to come back through town. And they take them down to there's a dump site in the river, and they whack them. And basically, this was kind of, sort of like, this is like, hey, this is them handling business, just stay away, But then what got the guy fired was his brother. I almost thought you were talking about this guy. It's very similar, but it's a different city. The police chief's brother was a business guy. And then the police chief started kidnapping and killing business people, like business rivals, not former insurgents or civilian collaborators or something. And when that happened, they didn't, I don't believe they arrested him, but they did fire him, and they told us all that because you're walking into a situation where there's a lot of turmoil and turnover in the security forces leadership. Mm-hmm. But then, as these gentlemen know, that all got flushed down the toilet, and we went to Afghanistan instead. Thank God,
Yeah, I mean, to your point, what we ended up finding out about that particular coup was the fact that that tribe had paid off the Ministry of Interior in order to take control of that particular law enforcement activity. But we just had to deal with it, and that's how they do it there. It's like if you got the assets, you get to have the control, you get the power. And I guess we kind of politically do the same thing here in the United States a lot of times, for God's sakes. We got, a woke culture that perceives himself to be all powerful, and for the most part, they got all the money, and so I guess it's a global contagion. That kind of just goes into what Jose's doing nowadays with the IO stuff. Look at these comparisons from experience that we have in different eras and in different locations, but at the same time, it could be translated, to here and now, where any of us are right this moment in the places where we live. And how do we take these experiences, because going back to 2003, here we are almost 20 years in the future, and it's been a rough road to hoe. Nonetheless, we've got a ton of experience that we can share with each other, and maybe now's the time, maybe now's the time where we take our humility and we look at it and say, do we have a template for success in sharing that with the people that live in the town that we live in, or more so our families, and what can we give them to not make the same mistakes that these other people may have made? One of the things I had in the barracks there at Camp Ramadi, in my room, we had an old Iranian jail that we converted into a barracks there. But right there by my hatch on the way out, I had a picture of an Iraqi policeman holding his son looking down the road. Okay. That was my inspiration. What does it look like for them? What can I do to enhance their future? Because I'm not going to be here forever, and that was always my forethought in doing my job. And then a place for reflection too, when I came back off the missions and look at that and just go, did I do my best this week? Makes me wonder still.
Yeah, there's a lot of discrepancies with all that took place. I wanted to ask both of you gentlemen, are you familiar with Camp Buka? Where essentially, I think they took all the Operation Phantom Fury detainees, they held them there, and while they were in Camp Buka, they were able to network, and that's what became the leadership for ISIS.
Yeah, well, Baghdadi was the principal actor that was birthed out of that place.
Yeah, no, I've gone.
Not that got his ass though, so fuck him if you can't take a joke,
Yeah, they're still capable, man. They're still out there doing their deeds.
Well, I mean, think about the introduction. What am I actually saying there? That this guy, Saddam Hussein, has had since probably, and thank God he's gone. But I mean, it's just like old Pineapple Head from Panama and all these other people, that we've had to deal with over time, that we give them support and they go nuts. And we're dealing with it right now with Putin. I mean, the Cold War is over, the wall comes down, let's go ahead and get all these nuclear weapons and put them someplace else, and let's create this warm and fuzzy thing, when in fact, I was sharing this with a cousin of mine yesterday, and to paraphrase Putin, this guy says, if there is no Russia, then why should there be anybody else on this planet? Okay, that's some pretty crazy shit right there. Well, Saddam Hussein was actually the same type of megalomaniac / psychopath, and utilized it to his advantage until we finally just decided, hey, enough of this, and went in there and took charge. But unfortunately, because of the cult of personality, that it was so deeply imprinted into the culture of the Iraqi people, it had completely lost civilization. And that style of violence was just, hey, this is everyday stuff. I remember sitting in my hooch in my headquarters at Camp Ramadi with Lieutenant Colonel Foster, and we utilized the old series The Sopranos, just to kind of understand the personalities that we were dealing with in the Ramadi area, because all these people had been part of the Ba'ath Party and were definitely connected to the highest levels of Baghdad, and so these are the people that we have to hang out with every single day, and at any given point they could cut your throat or snatch you and make you disappear. That's part of their culture, and so I think it's a great event that you have put together here today. And sir, I'll tell you what, your story means a lot. because without us spending the time sharing these details of our personal experience, it's never going to go, because I did a raid one day, and I came across the blueprints for the Haditha Dam. Okay. I held on to those blueprints for years, but you know what? Every time I came in contact with those blueprints, I got sick. It was in my psyche. I hated that place. And so I attempted to give those blueprints to the 75th Ranger Regiment. I had an old friend who was a retired sergeant major who was working up in their, I think G7 or something like that. And I said, I'm going to give these to you guys. You guys were the ones that took it down during the invasion. You should have these. And these were blueprints that were done by the Soviet Union. It was in Cyrillic, it was in English, and it was also in Arabic. And they took them in, but they gave them to their JAG officer. CENTCOM turned around and said, oh, these belong to the Iraqi people. We're going to have to give those back to you if you want them, and so on. So I tried to give it to the National Museum of the United States Marine Corps up there in Quantico. And they told me these are never going to be displayed. And we all know what the cost of living and fighting in Haditha was like. Okay, it covered many deployments, and I eventually, and this is before you and I got together and did some of our 50 milers and 100 milers, Jose. But me, Matt Coyle, and Melissa, we did a 100-miler to Fayetteville, and I gave those blueprints to the Airborne and Special Operations Museum there, and I have not felt that grimy since I gave them up. You know, there's just some things you got to let go, and these storytellings are like that for us. You know, we need this.
Yeah, narrative unity is one of the key components to getting better. Next week, I'm sitting down with Dr. Mann, who runs narrative strategies and who is a foremost expert on narrative warfare. And I do believe that national security has to look into how narrative is affecting the populace in a way where they're able to somehow integrate it into their work. Because the game's changing. You know, radicalization is changing. The way it's happening is changing. And they're not putting together the dots between, you know, you have this economic component of esports propagating and proliferating on a massive scale, where now anyone on the face of the planet, even, you know, anyone who's the age of 5 or 6 or can wield a laptop or a smartphone, gets bona fide weapons trainings, you know, strategies and tactics training. And then you got, you know, revisionist storytelling that's being modified for these games. It's going to change the landscape. And, you know, while we might never see a force of ISIS, you know, invading from, you know, our shores, we can sure as hell see it propagating from within and spreading outward, like we've seen today. And that's kind of the, you know, these like QAnon, the Proud Boys, the bougie, whatever all these little cells are, all these little white terrorist cells propagated as a result of units of information, cultural transmissions that started off as somewhat jokes. And here we are today having to fend for our identity, our places as warriors in a society that was built by warriors, having to justify that as a result of these far extremist activities. And, you know, I take note from you, Andrew, whenever you say, you know, this is, you know, authoritarian versus, you know, non-authoritarian, right? And how do we inoculate that? How do we fix that? Well, and I had this conversation yesterday with a friend of mine who basically said, in order for you to understand, you know, this idea of future strategy or future intelligence, you have to understand the anecdotes of the past to the detail. And, you know, for me, it began, you know, in 2003, whenever I saw the invasion take place on TV, and that spark. So thank you, gentlemen. And I don't know if you have anything to say, Phil, or you, Polly.
I'll let Phil go first if he's got anything he wants to add.
Hey, and I would say for Philip, I know this, his son is in the 82nd, and you guys know him a little bit at this point. His early time in the Army is significant to where we are right now. And to your point, Jose, yeah, I think Philip can actually fill in some blank spaces, even though we've done a remarkable job in our experience. But historically, there's something there that I think we need to learn that the Marine Corps didn't teach us, and that's why I have such deep respect and love for this guy, that, he did something in a time period in American history where most guys. Now, I think I'm going to go surfing today instead, and this dude just said, I'm going to join the Army. I'm going to go see the world, meet exotic people and kill them, and that's what I find remarkable, about my old friend, is that he's so humble, but at the same time, savage. So say something, Philip. I know you're still...
Is he still
Thank you,
on here?
Mark.
Oh yeah, he is.
Thank you, Andrew, for sharing your story. Thank you, Mark, for the introduction that you did. It's a great introduction. I know we've been collaborating over the last couple of days, and you've been discussing with me what it is that you found and what you're doing, deep dives, so on and so forth. Jose, thank you as always. You and Polly for hosting these things. Great forum. I love it. It's interesting because as Andrew, as you were talking about your experiences way back in the day, and here with what Mark followed up with, some of his stories that I've heard, I'm thinking back, I'm reminiscing because, it starts back towards the end of the Cold War between the Europe, United States, and Russia. When I joined the military, it was in 1984. I wanted to go to Germany, had no clue, and there I was. And I'll just tell you briefly, but I don't want to get into details because I'd really, if I'm gonna do this, I want to go back and think about some of the things, because I could be very scattered and I don't want to do that, but I'll leave it on a high note. So I finally get over to Germany. I go into the 21st reception station, which is in Frankfurt, Germany, in Rhine-Main at the time, because you had at least two major inputs coming into Germany, which was West Germany, East Germany. So a lot of the troops came into Frankfurt. A lot of the troops came in through, I can't think of it, Kaiserslautern. There's a big Air Force base there, and there's another major air base in there. But anyhow, so I show up in the middle of the dead of winter. It was in February, to be exact, of 1985. As soon as the airplane opened the hatches, I could smell this pungent smell of cow manure. And back in those days, German farmers would spread their fields with cow manure year round. Now they're only allowed to do it twice a year. Go figure, right? So I'm at the reception station for a couple of days. I wound up getting assigned to 3rd Infantry Division, 2nd Brigade, 1st Battalion Infantry, which has its roots going back to the Civil War. So anyhow, I wind up showing up, brand new troopy, recognized a lot of guys I'd gone through basic training. A lot of us had gone to the 1st and 15th. Not everybody in the same company, but we were spread out, and some of the other guys went off to the 8th Infantry, so on and so forth. So I'm put in a holdover barracks room, and that was with 3rd Platoon. I wound up being assigned to 2nd Platoon a couple days later, or a day later, but I remember, going there. I remember bedding down for the night, and at like Oh Dark Stupid, is an old coworker of mine used to stay. There's alarm bells going off. Everybody's running around doing a bunch of shit. And I said, "What's going on?" We're mobilizing. It's an alert. We're going out. And I thought the fucking Russians were coming, man. That's what I thought. Nobody told me what was going on. It was just a typical drill. And I'm thinking, oh my God, the Russians across the border. And wow, this is it. So that was a pretty intense moment for me. But I'll leave it at that because, looking back on it, I thought, it was pretty funny, but it was very real to me because nobody told me what was going on, so I'll just leave it at that, and have to do some research and thinking and jotting down notes to keep it on track. But thank you. I appreciate it.
What he didn't mention, okay, is they were part of a nuclear force that we have not seen since then. Okay. They were a mechanized force that was part of the defense of Europe at that time. And on the battlefield, there were nuclear weapons that were part of the defense of Europe at that time. We have not seen anything like that since. And this is where we are now in history today. Just to bring you up to date. Okay, boys. My friend was part of that shit.
Looking back, I can't remember how many divisions and corps were actually over in Europe, but just about at that time in Western Germany, there was military concerns all over the place. And yeah, it was kind of interesting. I actually did border patrol on the east and West German side. I actually did 30 days of border patrol. I've guarded strategic depots, gone on major exercises while I was over there, and we spent a lot of time training locally, but also going to gunnery and honing our skills over that period of time. And looking back, it's kind of remarkable. Unlike how Europe is today, they've drawn down the forces. There's only a few stationed folks over there. Obviously, they've done some built up here in the last month or so, but absolutely nothing to what was there when I was there some 30 years ago. And I'll leave it at that, unless anybody's got any questions.
I do. What's your forecast with Ukraine and Russia? I don't mean to go off topic, but something's off, man. Something's off.
Yeah, I see that something's off, Jose. It's all kind of, I guess, speculation at this point. I mean, there's a lot going on over there. I get some good information from Bill, who you see on the emails that I send out. I share with Mark. From his perspective, he's a great character. He'd be great on a podcast. I think you would agree with me, Mark. But
absolutely.
So anyhow, if Putin decides that it's an all-out war, or if there's concessions made, like they made concessions back during World War I and World War II, Europeans, those concessions, and we know how those concessions turned out. I think history repeats itself. I think there will be, from a positive standpoint, there could be some concessions. Putin gets Ukraine, but he took Crimea back in 2014. Who's to say he's not going to take Maldives and Moldova and some of those other border lines, and who's to say he's going to stop there, you know? And we just don't know. Obviously, there is a risk that the United States is sending arms and equipment to help support Ukraine, and obviously Putin can take that as, you know, an act of war, along with EU. NATO isn't involved, but EU is definitely involved in bolstering, you know, Ukraine and the surrounding countries, you know, Poland and some of those other countries, Romania, all along on the Eastern Europe side of the old East-West Europe. You know, and plus his plan of attack has not gone very well, obviously. I think he knows it, they know it. Logistics, attitude, I don't know, but you know, in the next days and weeks, we're going to find out, you know, just how far they're going to go, or Russia's going to go, and what's the response of Western Europe. I've been saying for years, and this is a personal opinion, I've been saying for years, you know, Europe's got to get off their ass and protect their own self-interest, because they've been on the gravy train for 75 fucking years. The United States taking the lead. Not saying that we don't have interest to keep our allies safe, but hey, come on, you guys have the money. You need to produce, or you need to stand up and take responsibility for your own protection. It's not the United States, you know, globally is responsible for everybody. We have interests, but it's really not our responsibility. What else you got for me, Jose?
That's all I got. That's all I got. I don't want to go off the deep end here.
Yeah, that's always
I mean,
easy to do.
let's kind of mesh it together, because I mean, think of, we're talking about the invasion of Iraq. We're talking about personal experiences, and then I think we're beginning to see just how relevant or relative, I should say, all our experiences are. What's the common thread amongst us? And that is, we're warriors. Okay, that's a culture that they're trying to cancel out. I remember in the 1990s where, you know, you had some liberal folks were invited to Quantico to go observe, you know, the training of infantry lieutenants, and they went back to Washington, D.C. and started talking about the Marine Corps. Like, well, these guys are shaved head barbarians. They shouldn't exist in our society today. We need to soften the Marine Corps up a little bit, maybe get rid of it, et cetera, et cetera. I don't think the American people want to do that at all. You know, they got to have a little bit of protection. And I guess that's what the United States Department of Defense does for the Europeans is look, we've already spent enough money on enabling you guys to protect yourselves, yet you're going to act like a bunch of pacifists with, you know, your own version of the Green New Deal, and sit around and smoke hash and be freaking transgender. That's not even normal. You know, normal guys are doing what we're doing right this moment. We're talking about these experiences, and you know, at the expense of blood, sweat, and tears. Regardless, we're still talking about reality. That's the difference, you know. And if we're gonna do these things more frequently, we need to get more people involved, because I think there's some other people in the ranks that, you know, they've enjoyed kicking back for a while, but I think that, you know, if they read the newspaper or they watch television and see the news, they're getting stirred up and they need to be able to express something. I remember when I was down in Austin, Texas, a couple of years ago, with Major Wahid Khan. You know, I mean, what a stud, but unfortunately he's crippled and he's in a wheelchair. He still works his ass off, you know, to try and be as normal as possible. You know, MARSOC officer, force recon guy, infantry officer. My son, right? He tricked me, you know, and he goes, "Oh yeah, I've got this VA appointment I got to go to. You know, they're going to check my throat or some shit like that." And so I go to this VA appointment with him, and it ended up being a group of Marines having a group counseling together. And the remarkable stories that I heard and the honor and respect in this group of dudes was just amazing. And it was all generations talking about their experiences. And it was right at the onset of COVID too. So it was going to be like the last group setting that they could be in without having to disperse for an undetermined amount of time. And, you know, Paulie, Herrera, you guys are saints for putting this together and continuing to get the stories out there, you know?
I just got a couple I got a couple things to add. And I just kind of kick back and let you guys, share your stories, because I truly personally appreciate your time and what you did. I mean, when I hear you guys speak, I try to put myself there. Obviously I wasn't there during your time, or even during the invasion of Iraq. I was probably 15 years old, a sophomore in high school, like Jose talked about. But I have these images seared in my brain of watching this stuff on TV. And at this point, I wasn't really sure where my life was headed. But I just remember seeing this and just having a connection to it. Like it was the first big moment in my life that I really remember, besides 9/11, the terror attacks and everything. We're going to war. Our country's going to war. Like I'm glued to the TV watching this unfold. Like I talked about before when we did the podcast with Andrew, these these images of like Marines crossing the bridges into Nasiriyah and Baghdad, the real iconic ones. Like those were such selling points for me, and probably for a lot of guys from me and Jose's time frame, right? We can't make the decision to join at this point. We're still in high school. We're not old enough. And but I really think that invasion is what really pushed us to say, you know what, we're doing it. A lot of guys we've talked to have been like, yeah, 9/11 happened the next day, I'm at the recruiter's office, because they could, like, that was the moment they needed to say, okay, I'm gonna go do what needs to be done for my country. But
Yep.
I'm 100% with you on and I know Jose is as well. We talked countless times about getting people to share their stories. I'm gonna botch this, but you know, there's something that kind of stuck with me. They say in life you die twice. The first time is when you leave your physical body, and the second time is when your name is spoken for the last time. And I think it's up to all of us that have stories like you all have shared, to talk about them. And this just isn't about, our brothers dying or people, leaving this world. It's about the people that have impacted you in your life along the way to get you to this point. Um, if you don't share that stuff and you do end up passing on, what happens? What happens to all that information? What happens to everything that you could share, and just by sharing it might impact someone and lead them down a different path. I mean, it's our duty to do what we're doing here. And it's no mistake why this is happening. you know um and Jose could probably elaborate on that for hours and hours, but there's a reason we're doing this. um Not everybody just wants to pop out and start talking about, hey, this is what I did, this is what I did. It's not about that. It's about sharing those experiences, so somebody that may not know you might have a connection to you just through what you're speaking about. They don't have to be there, they don't have to do anything. um so yeah, I really do appreciate it. Hopefully, this will kind of beat down the stigma of being able to talk about things. I mean, just hearing you guys in the detail that you're sharing the stories, I have stories myself that I could, remember like they were yesterday. And this is 20 years ago. This is freaking 40 years ago. Some of these stories that, Philip's talking about. And he's sharing them in such detail because that's ingrained in him to the core. You will never forget those
Mhm.
things. And we just have to, yeah, we have to keep doing this. You know, I think it's great for all of us. It's great for the people that listen and maybe don't want to, participate. At some point they might. It just might take some time. So yeah, Generation Kill. I'm probably gonna go watch that again because that's how I can romanticize about those events without being there. I need, hearing it your account of the invasion and what you went through. Like, I don't have things. I wasn't there. I didn't see it, so I need to see things to kind of put with the story. But um, yeah, no, I just appreciate it. Appreciate you guys and your time, and we'll do it again.